Their mercy was a clock, and the clock was running out. Admiral Valerius stood on the command deck of the human fleet carrier. The reckoning. His reflection a ghost in the polished obsidian floor. Before him, the main strategic display rendered the Axiom fleet in stark crimson icons, a rigid, unyielding wall of force. They were blockading the independent colony of Xylos, a world of 7 million souls now slowly starving under the Axiom's doctrinal ultimatum. The demand was simple seed sovereignty or face purification. A smaller secondary clock glowed in the corner of the display, its numbers a stark white against the tactical void 142251. Report, Valerius said, his voice a low counterpoint to the hum of the ship's life support. His fleet-mind solace shimmered into existence beside him, a column of silver light woven into a vaguely humanoid form. The Axiom fleet holds its formation. Admiral, the AI reported, its tone perfectly neutral. 36 capital ships cruiserweight and above. Our analysis confirms a 3-2 firepower advantage in their favor. Their ultimatum to us stands: withdraw beyond the system's heliopause or be considered active belligerents. The console beside Valerius chirped softly, the glare catching the lines on his face. His tactical officer, Commander Yorick, shifted his weight, the synth leather of his chair creaking in protest. They're arrogant. They sit there like graven idols, so sure of their numbers. Yorick's hands were clenched on his console, his knuckles white. We should show them that human calculus includes variables they can't measure. Valerius gave a slight shake of his head, his eyes still fixed on the crimson icons. He knew the cost of that path, the price paid in blood and fire. There was always another way. A way must be forged from light, not from graves. In a medical bay deep within the Xylos colony, a doctor named Ilara watched a child's vital signs flutter weakly on a flickering monitor. The rhythmic beep was slowing each interval, a small lifetime of dread. The last of the reserve power cells for the autosurgeon was failing its energy indicator, a pulsing, desperate red. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, her hand resting on the child's feverish brow. Outside, the sky was unnaturally dark, blotted out by the Axiom ships hanging in silent, patient judgment. The rumors of a human fleet arriving were just that, rumors whispered in ration lines, a fragile hope against the crushing weight of the ultimatum. "Solace, what is the Axiom's doctrinal weakness?" Valerius asked, turning away from the main view screen. The silver light of the AI pulsed gently. "Their strength is their weakness, Admiral. Ultimatum primacy is built on absolute predictability. They present an overwhelming force, state their terms, and execute consequence. Their tactical doctrine is rigid, prioritizing threat elimination by calculated mass and energy output. They believe the math of war is immutable." The scent of ozone from a nearby conduit filled the air for a moment, a sharp reminder of the power humming within the ship's hull. Valerius nodded slowly. Predictability could be leveraged. Rigidity could be shattered. They expect a charge, a probe, or a retreat. They expect us to play by their rules of engagement. He looked at Yorick, whose frustration was a tangible force on the bridge. "We will do none of the above. We will not challenge their wall. We will make their wall irrelevant." The Admiral's gaze shifted to his communications officer, Lieutenant Reyna. "Prep the first convoy. Automated hulls, full supply loadout for Xylos." They would answer the ultimatum with bread, not bombs. Yorick's head snapped up. "A convoy, Admiral, they'll tear it to pieces before it's halfway to the planet. We'd be sacrificing drones for nothing." Valerius gestured to the tactical display. "It is the bait, Commander. We are not just running a blockade. We are here to teach a lesson." He brought up a secondary window displaying a complex deployment pattern of small, innocuous-looking drones. Begin deployment of the Ghost Swarm outer perimeter, and prepare the escort frigates. They will shepherd the convoy. Solace analyzed the command, its silver form growing brighter. Projected success probability of the convoy reaching Xylos under direct assault is 2.7%, Admiral. Projected loss of all escort frigates is 89.4%. The AI's voice was a stream of pure data, a chillingly precise forecast of failure. The low thrum of the ship's inertial dampeners seemed to deepen a physical weight matching the numbers. Valerius met the AI's simulated gaze without flinching. Your calculus is sound, Solace. But you are missing a variable. Run the projection again, but factor in the Ghost Swarm operating at full capacity. A few seconds of silence stretched into an eternity. The AI went still, its form flickering as it processed the radical new input. On the main screen, the simulation re-ran. Ghost drones marked in pale blue moved into position. The Axiom fleet in crimson reacted. But this time the outcome was wildly different. The projected casualty rates plummeted. The convoy's success probability soared. Jorek stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. What are they? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. They aren't weapons, Valerius replied. They are mirrors, and the Axiom are about to stare into them. The bridge of the Axiom flagship, the Immutable Will, was a monument to order. Its commander, Prelate Kalen, observed the human fleet with an expression of cold disdain. He saw their small automated convoy begin to move, flanked by a pitiful screen of frigates. It was an insult, a gesture of defiance so pathetic it was almost comical. His tactical officer turned to him. Prelate, the humans are attempting to run the blockade. Their main fleet holds its position. The air on his bridge was sterile, recycled, without the faint human sense of sweat and ozone that marked a Terran vessel. Kalen scoffed, a dry, rasping sound. Their arrogance is typical. They believe a token gesture will display resolve. He raised his hand, the gesture sharp and precise. Open a channel to the human flagship. It is time they understood the meaning of an ultimatum. The communication request flashed on Lieutenant Reyna's console on the reckoning. Admiral, the Axiom flagship is hailing us. Valerius nodded. On screen, a monologue of power was about to meet a dialogue of truth. The face of Prelate Kalen filled the main display. He was severe, his features sharp angles and rigid lines, his uniform a stark black affair that seemed to absorb the light around him. Admiral Valerius Kalen began, his voice laced with a condescending lethargy. Your fleet trespasses in Axiom-adjudicated space. Your pathetic attempt to run our purification cordon is noted. This is your final warning. Withdraw your ships or we will cleanse this system of your presence. The transmission was system-wide, a piece of public theater for the starving colonists on Xylos. Valerius's expression remained placid, betraying no anger, no fear. Prelate Kalen, we are a duly commissioned relief fleet operating under interstellar law. We are here to deliver humanitarian aid to the people of Xylos. The heat from a nearby console washed over his hand as he rested it on the railing. We are not here to fight. We are, however, here to offer a lesson in calculus. Your move. He cut the channel, leaving Kalen staring at the empty void of space on his own view screen. The prelate's face tightened into a mask of fury. Target the convoy, he hissed. Erase it. The first shot was a question, and the answer would be a reflection. Crimson lances of energy erupted from the Axiom fleet. They were precise, powerful, and perfectly calculated to overwhelm the convoy's escort frigates. The human ships scattered their point defense systems, firing frantically, weaving a thin tapestry of defiance against the overwhelming onslaught. On the bridge of the reckoning, the tactical display became a storm of light and data. Impacts on the frigate screen imminent, Jorik called out, his voice tense. The ship beneath them vibrated slightly as its own energy systems spooled up to power the command-level sensors. Activate the Ghost Swarm. Full refraction. Valerius ordered, his voice cutting through the rising tension. Solace, open the ledger. The command was instantly executed. Far out in the void, the seemingly simple drones came to life. Panels on their surfaces unfolded, revealing impossibly smooth, mirrored faces. They angled themselves with microscopic precision, catching the incoming Axiom energy beams. They did not absorb the fire. They did not block it. They bent it. The void between the fleets shimmered, then exploded into a silent, kaleidoscopic aurora. The Axiom's coherent energy beams were fractured into a billion splinters of light redirected at harmless angles into deep space. It was a dazzling, blinding spectacle that turned the blackness of space into a cathedral of broken light. The Axiom's targeting sensors, designed to track solid objects and energy signatures, were instantly overwhelmed by a flood of phantom signals, ghost echoes, and blinding feedback. Their perfect calculations dissolved into chaos. Their certainty became their blindfold. Through the storm of refracted light, the small convoy of human supply ships sailed on untouched. The Axiom fleet, its primary weapons rendered useless by an enemy who refused to be a target, ceased firing in confusion. Prelate Kalen stared at his tactical display, now a mess of nonsensical data and sensor ghosts. He had aimed a sword at his enemy's heart, only to find his enemy was made of light and air. The sheer impossibility of it left him speechless. One of the escort frigates, the Steadfast, wasn't so lucky. A redirected beam, a stray splinter from the Grand Refraction, caught its port nacelle. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring across its internal comms. In a corridor near the damaged engine, a damage control team scrambled through a haze of acrid smoke and ozone. Sparks rained down from a ruptured power conduit as a young ensign wrestled a plasma extinguisher into place. "Hold the line!" a chief petty officer yelled over the roar of escaping gas. The ensign grit her teeth, a fresh plasma burn searing across her forearm. But she held the seal steady, the ship's heartbeat a frantic drumming against the soles of her boots. They paid for the lesson in scar tissue and steel. On the bridge of the reckoning, the cost was noted. The Steadfast reports minor damage but is stable. The convoy is through the cordon, Reyna reported, a note of triumph in her voice. They're clear. They're going to make it. Jorik let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, a wide grin spreading across his face. He looked at Valerius with a newfound respect. They had faced down a superior force and disarmed it without firing a single offensive shot. The Axiom's ultimatum had been broken. Valerius allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction before his focus returned to the larger strategic picture. Open a channel to the prelate. Audio only. A moment later, the connection was live. Kalen's voice, when it came, was tight with repressed fury. "What trickery is this human?" Valerius's reply was calm, measured the tone of a teacher addressing a promising but misguided student. "It is not trickery, prelate. It is physics. The ledger is open. Your first move has been noted and tallied. I would advise you to reconsider your next one." He cut the connection again, leaving the Axiom commander to stew in his own impotent rage. The debt was recorded. The account remained open. Later, in the quiet solitude of his ready room, Valerius watched the tactical replay. The shimmering lattice of light, the bewildered Axiom fleet, the tiny convoy slipping through the gap. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. Solace materialized near his desk, its silver form a soft glow in the dim light. The primary objective of delivering aid to Xylos is complete, Admiral. A tactical withdrawal would now preserve our forces and cement a political victory. The AI's logic was flawless as always. Retreat from a position of strength. Declare the mission a success. Valerius shook his head. We treated the symptoms, Solace, not the disease. The Axiom's doctrine is the enemy here. As long as they believe an ultimatum is a valid substitute for diplomacy, there will be another Xylos, and another after that. He turned to face the AI, his expression firm. This fleet was commissioned for more than just relief runs. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the quiet room. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. We are here to make the cost of their doctrine so clear, so undeniable, that they abandon it themselves. The teacher's duty was not to punish, but to illuminate. To do that, Valerius continued, we need to force the prelate to make a choice, not just react to a stimulus. We need to turn his greatest strength, his unyielding aggressive doctrine, into his own undoing. He gestured to the main system map on his wall display. Begin Phase 2, the open hand. Solace's form pulsed as it accessed the new strategy. Admiral, this plan involves the intentional exposure of our capital ships, including this one. It is a high-risk, low-probability strategy. Valerius smiled faintly. The probabilities change when you control the equation. Commander Jorik, he said, activating his internal comm. Begin moving the fleet. Wide dispersal. Let's set the table for our guest. On Xylos, the first human supply containers touched down in designated relief zones. Cheers erupted as the hatches hissed open, revealing crates of medical supplies, nutrient paste, and water purifiers. In the medical bay, Dr. Ilara installed a fresh power cell into the autosurgeon. The machine whirred to life, its diagnostic lights turning a steady, healthy green. The child's vital signs on the monitor stabilized almost immediately, the rhythmic beep growing stronger, more confident. Looking out a viewport at the human ships now arranging themselves in a wide, graceful arc in her sky, Ilara felt a tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. They were not just a hope anymore. They were real. But above them, the storm was gathering anew. Aboard the immutable Will Prelate, Kalen watched the human fleet reposition. His sensor crews, having finally cleared their systems of the phantom signals, reported the new formation with confusion. The human ships were spreading out, abandoning the defensible posture of a concentrated fleet. They were creating gaps, vast open corridors between their battle groups. It was a tactical blunder of the highest order, an act of supreme arrogance. He saw the human flagship, the Reckoning, sitting almost exposed at the center of this ludicrously thin line. They are mocking us, his second-in-command snarled. They believe their light show has rendered us impotent. Kalen's rage had cooled, solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. The humans had played a clever trick, but tricks did not win wars. Overwhelming force did. Their new formation was a direct invitation, a challenge he was duty-bound to accept. His doctrine demanded a swift, decisive, and overwhelming response to defiance. He would not just defeat them, he would annihilate them. He would make them a lesson for the entire quadrant. The arrogant hand often closes on a nail. All ships, Kalen broadcast, his voice ringing with absolute authority across his fleet's comm network. Advance. Full power. We will punch through their center and decapitate their command. The consequence for defiance is annihilation. There will be no second warning. The Axiom fleet, a unified instrument of the prelate's will, surged forward. Engines flared to life, and the rigid wall of crimson icons on the Reckoning's tactical display became a spear aimed directly at its heart. "Admiral, they've taken the bait," Jorik reported, his voice a mixture of excitement and dread. The console in front of him showed the Axiom fleet accelerating into the wide corridor the humans had opened for them. "They are committing their entire force. Our flank exposure is critical if they deviate." The deck plates vibrated with the power of the Reckoning's engines as it held its position, a seemingly helpless target. Valerius watched the main display, his face a calm mask. His hands rested lightly on the command railing, steady and sure. "They will not deviate, Commander. Their doctrine won't allow it. Hold your nerve." The Reckoning was not a ship. It was a promise. The Axiom spearhead plunged deeper into the human formation. The distance between the fleets was closing rapidly. On the bridge of the immutable will Prelate, Kalen could see the human flagship growing larger in his main view screen. Victory was moments away. His ships were perfectly positioned for a devastating concentrated barrage that would atomize the human command vessel and shatter their fleet's morale. He had allowed them their moment of cleverness. Now came the inevitable conclusion. "They are in the optimal zone," Admiral Solace stated, its calm tone, a stark contrast to the escalating tension on the bridge. The trap was set. The prey was in position. Valerius took a slow breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and anticipation. He looked at Reyna. "Do it." The lieutenant's fingers flew across her console. Executing command. Across the vast, seemingly empty sector of space that the Axiom fleet now occupied, thousands of dormant microprobes launched stealthily hours before silently awoke. This was not a battlefield. It was a classroom. These probes were not weapons. They carried no warheads, no energy projectors. They were simply sensors, high-resolution optical, gravimetric, and energy spectrum scanners. In perfect unison, they activated, creating a multi-layered, omniscient tactical map of the entire engagement volume. But this map was not just for Admiral Valerius. With a burst of precisely targeted code, Solace bypassed the Axiom's firewalls and hijacked every single communication screen in their fleet. From the Prelate's grand strategic display to the smallest utility monitor in a freighter's engine room, the feed appeared unblockable, undeniable. Prelate Kalen stared in disbelief as his own command console was overridden. The view of the human flagship was replaced by a perfect top-down schematic of the entire battle. He saw his own fleet, a crimson spear. He saw the dispersed human ships, a pale blue net. And simultaneously, the same feed was broadcast down to the public channels on Xylos. Every civilian who had just received human aid now watched the same tactical display, a God's eye view of the judgment about to unfold in their skies. They forced the antagonist to witness their own calculus. The trap was not a physical one. There would be no sudden crossfire, no hidden minefields. The trap was information. On the public display that all now shared Solace began to run a projection. 1,000 lines of golden light bloomed from the human ships, illustrating their optimal firing solutions. The display highlighted the Axiom fleet's current trajectory, their shield frequencies, their energy reserves, their crew complements. It was a perfect, chillingly accurate simulation of the next 90 seconds. It showed with 99.7% certainty the exact consequences if Kalen continued his attack. It showed the precise flight paths of the human counter-barrage. It highlighted one by one which of his ships would be crippled, which would be vaporized. Beside each targeted vessel, a number appeared, the projected casualty count calculated with cold, impersonal accuracy. The simulation was a torrent of data, a mathematical proof of their own impending destruction. The numbers themselves became the weapon. A tally is more cruel than a sword, for it offers no illusions. On the bridge of the immutable will, a horrified silence descended. Kalen watched as the simulation marked his flagship for immediate catastrophic structural failure. He saw the casualty counter for his own vessel tick up into the thousands. Across his comms, he heard the stunned gasps and fearful chatter of his captains. They were all seeing it. They were all watching the simulated death of their own commands, their own crews. They saw the trap they had so arrogantly flown into laid bare for them, for their enemy, and for the entire world to see. The Axiom fleet was now at the optimal point of no return, their momentum carrying them forward into the jaws of the perfectly calculated kill box. Valerius opened a channel one last time, his voice broadcast to every ship, every screen. It was not the voice of a conqueror, but of a final arbiter. Prelate Kalen, your doctrine demands you commit to this attack. Our doctrine requires us to show you the price before we send the bill. You have 60 seconds to order a full and complete stop. Hold your position, or we will make this projection a reality. His voice was calm, devoid of triumph. The choice is yours. The ledger is open. A new timer appeared on every screen, superimposed over the unfolding tactical nightmare, its numbers large, white, and stark. 60, 59, 58. The countdown was a heartbeat for the entire system. Each second, a choice between pride and survival. On the bridge of the immutable will, every officer was frozen. Their gazes locked on the horrifyingly precise simulation playing out on their screens. They saw their own futures rendered in the cold light of data hull breaches, reactor failures, the silent venting of atmosphere into the void. The casualty numbers were not abstract statistics. They were a roll call of their own impending deaths. Prelate Kalen stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles white. His entire life, his entire faith was built on the unshakable rock of axiom doctrine. An ultimatum given is an ultimatum enforced. To stop now was to admit failure, to concede that another philosophy held more power than his own. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, feel the silent, desperate plea behind their disciplined facades. The human admiral's voice echoed in his mind, calm and certain. The choice is yours. The ledger is open. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Valerius had not defeated him with weapons, but with simple, undeniable mathematics broadcast for the universe to witness. The timer continued its merciless descent. 44, 43. The console beside him gave off a low hum, a sound he had always found reassuring, but which now seemed to mock him with its indifference. Doctrine was a cage and the door was swinging shut. On the reckoning, the atmosphere was just as tense, but it was the tension of a drawn bowstring, not a breaking chain. Yorick's hand hovered over the firing solution console, his finger millimeters from the contact that would unleash the perfectly simulated storm. 15 seconds to firing window, Admiral, he said, his voice tight. Valerius watched the Axiom fleet, his expression unreadable. He saw no triumph in this moment, only a grim necessity. He had offered a path away from the cliff's edge. He could not force the prelate to take it. The faint scent of ozone hung in the air, a prelude to the storm. On Xylos, 7 million people held their breath. In homes, in shelters in the crowded medical bay, where Dr. Ilara stood beside her now stable patient, every screen showed the same terrible countdown. The child she had saved was asleep, oblivious to the judgment hanging in the sky. Ilara watched the numbers fall, her hand gripping the edge of the medical bed. She was not watching a battle. She was watching a final exam, and an entire civilization's philosophy was about to be graded. 10, 9, 8. Pride has the heaviest price of all. Aboard the immutable will, Kalen's second-in-command, sub-prelate Thrax took a step forward. Prelate, we cannot stop. Our authority, our entire way of life. Kalen did not look at him. He looked at the numbers. He saw the face of his doctrine, and for the first time he saw it for what it was, a suicide pact dressed in the robes of strength. The timer showed 3, 2. He closed his eyes. All ships, he said, his voice cracking like fracturing ice. All engines. Stop. Hold position. Acknowledge. The spear broke against a word. The command, raw and laced with the agony of a shattered belief system, shot through the Axiom fleet. On the Reckoning's tactical display, the crimson icons of the Axiom spearhead shuddered and began to decelerate, their engine signatures flaring with reverse thrust. They bled momentum with agonizing slowness, but they were stopping. They were obeying. A collective sigh of relief went through the human bridge crew, a wave of released tension so palpable it was almost a sound. Yorick pulled his hand back from the firing key as if it were burned. The simulation on the screens vanished, replaced once more by the live tactical feed of a fleet in disarray. Valerius allowed the silence to hold for a moment, letting the weight of the Axiom's choice settle. Then he nodded to Reyna. Open a fleet-wide channel to the Axiom. No encryption. Let the colony hear. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but carried the immense authority of his victory. Prelate Kalen, you have made a wise decision. You have chosen life over doctrine. The ledger reflects this. On the main screen, now shared across both fleets and the world below, a new display appeared. It was a simple 2-column ledger. On one side, ultimatum doctrine. On the other, the tally of lives that had just been spared by its suspension. Port 12-819 Axiom crew. A reckoning is not about punishment. It is about balance. This is not a surrender. Valerius continued, his voice echoing in the sudden, profound quiet of the void. It is an education. We will now begin escorting our remaining relief convoys to Xylos. Your fleet will hold its position and observe. You will witness the act of giving, and you will learn that a hand held open is more powerful than a fist held ready. He was dictating terms not of conquest, but of rehabilitation. He was not just breaking their fleet, he was breaking their philosophy. But a doctrine so rigid does not die quietly. On the bridge of the Axiom battlecruiser, Iron Resolve sub-prelate Thrax watched the human admiral's broadcast with a face carved from granite. Kalen's order to stop was a betrayal, a heresy of the highest order. He had not been defeated by a superior force, but by a trick of light and numbers. It was a coward's victory, and he would not honor it. The prelate has been compromised, Thrax snarled to his own bridge crew. His will is broken, ours is not. He slammed his hand down on his command console, overriding the fleet-wide channel. The faithful are often the most dangerous in their doubt. To all loyal commanders of the Axiom, Thrax's voice roared across a private channel he had opened to a handful of ships commanded by like-minded hardliners. Our sacred doctrine has been spat upon by a weakling and a trickster. We are the true will of the Axiom. We will complete the purification. All ships loyal to the true path break formation and engage the human flagship. We will send their precious ledger to the pyre. A half-dozen crimson icons on the Reckoning's tactical display suddenly broke from the main Axiom fleet. They ignored Kalen's frantic orders to return to formation and surged forward, their weapons glowing hot. Admiral A. Rogue Squadron is breaking off, Yorick yelled, his momentary relief evaporating into fresh adrenaline. They're on a direct attack vector for us. This was the escalation Valerius had feared but anticipated. The Axiom's rigid structure, once fractured, was prone to splintering. The main fleet, in its state of confusion and forced neutrality, was now a passive observer to a battle within a battle. The ship's deck shuddered as its own point defense cannons swiveled to face the new threat. Their broken sword had forged a half-dozen daggers. Down on Xylos, a new wave of fear washed over the civilian population. In a small apartment crowded with neighbors, a young man named Kalen, a common name on a world that had once admired Axiom discipline, watched the rogue ships charge. He had felt a surge of hope when the main fleet stopped, a sense that the nightmare was over. Now terror returned, colder and sharper than before. "They're still attacking," someone whispered in the dark room, the words hanging like a shroud. "Why are they still attacking?" Solace new projections. Thrax's squadron, only Valerius commanded, his voice sharp and focused. "I do not want them destroyed. I want them disarmed. Turn the classroom into a cage." The AI's silver form pulsed with activity, reconfiguring the ghost swarm, shifting from wide-spectrum refraction to targeted reflection. The risk to this vessel is now elevated to 47.3%. Valerius's eyes narrowed. The risk of letting them martyr themselves and validate their doctrine is 100%. Execute. A cage of light is the only prison for a man blinded by faith. The ghost swarm drones, which had been holding a passive station, reoriented themselves with blinding speed. This time they did not create a wide, diffuse curtain of light. They formed precise, interlocking corridors of mirrors invisible to the naked eye. The rogue Axiom ships, charging forward and firing their main cannons, suddenly found their own weapons turned against them. Beams of pure energy meant for the reckoning were caught, bent, and focused back at the ships that fired them. The lead Axiom battlecruiser fired a massive particle beam. 1,000 kilometers away, a perfectly aligned set of ghost drones caught the blast, funneling it through a chain of reflections like a current through a wire. The beam, losing almost none of its coherence, slammed back into the Iron Resolve's own shield generator. The ship shuddered, its shields flickering and dying as they were overloaded by their own power. Alarms blared across Thrax's bridge as his ship was surgically, impossibly neutered by its own attack. Their own strength became their shackles. One by one, the rogue ships were caught in the same elegant trap. A volley of plasma torpedoes was redirected into the engine section of the ship that launched them, disabling its propulsion without breaching the hull. A barrage of kinetic slugs was nudged just enough off course to shear away weapons emplacements, leaving the main ship intact but toothless. It was not a battle. It was a masterful display of cosmic martial arts, using the opponent's momentum and force against them. The human fleet barely had to fire a shot. But the trap was not perfect. One of the rogue cruisers, the Unyielding, unleashed a desperate, chaotic spread of medium-caliber laser fire, just as the mirror lattice was reconfiguring. Most of the beams were scattered harmlessly, but one beam, a brilliant green lance, slipped through a gap in the reflection field. It wasn't aimed at the flagship, but at one of the frigates holding the outer perimeter, the Endurance. The beam sliced across the frigate's dorsal spine, carving a molten trench through 3 decks. A lesson learned is rarely a lesson without pain. Aboard the Endurance, chaos erupted. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the terrifying red glow of emergency alerts. A section of the main corridor, exposed to the vacuum, was sealed off by emergency force fields. The shimmering blue barrier, the only thing holding the ship's atmosphere in. Crew members were thrown from their stations by the violent impact. In the ship's small hydroponics bay, a young botanist was pinned beneath a collapsed support beam, her leg trapped. The hiss of escaping air was a quiet, deadly counterpoint to the ship's screaming alarms. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, shocking silence of a ship holding its breath. The cost was instantly tallied on the Reckoning's bridge. The Endurance reports heavy damage, casualties unknown, but she is holding together. Rena reported, her voice strained. Damage control teams are responding. Valerius's jaw tightened. This was the price, a tangible, painful cost for his mercy. He had refused to annihilate the main fleet, and in doing so had allowed this splinter to lash out and draw blood. It was a burden he would carry, a new entry in his own internal ledger. A debt of mercy is paid with the coin of risk. The last of the rogue ships, its weapons silenced and its engines crippled, drifted helplessly in the void. Thrax, on the bridge of his powerless vessel, stared at the human flagship, which sat serene and untouched at the center of the web. He had thrown everything he had at it, and all he had managed to do was defeat himself. His grand charge had ended in utter humiliation. He was a monument to his own failed faith. The battle, if it could be called that, was over. Valerius watched the disabled ships for a long moment. He could destroy them now easily. No one would blame him. But that was not the point. Destruction taught nothing. He turned to his communications officer. Reyna, open a channel to Prelate Kalen. It is time for him to clean his own house. The connection was established instantly. Kalen's face appeared on the screen. He looked older, diminished, the rigid certainty in his eyes replaced by a profound, hollow weariness. He had watched the entire debacle, a spectator to the bloody footnote of his own broken doctrine. The master must correct the follies of the student, Prelate Valerius said, his voice level. Your subordinates have caused damage to one of my ships. They have violated your direct order to stand down. Their disposition is now your responsibility. You will dispatch your own security teams to secure their vessels and take their commanders into custody. You will do this now while we and the people of Xylos watch. It was the final move, the checkmate. He was forcing Kalen to personally dismantle the last vestiges of his own failed ideology, to be the enforcer of the new reality. Kalen nodded slowly, the motion of a man surrendering to the inevitable. It will be done, Admiral. He gave the orders, his voice devoid of emotion. Axiom shuttles, small and unassuming, launched from the main fleet and began the slow, methodical process of boarding the disabled rogue ships. The act was a public renunciation, a quiet, efficient erasing of the rebellion. Sub-Prelate Thrax did not resist when Kalen's security teams came for him. He had already been defeated by a force he could not comprehend. The final judgment was not a verdict, but an act of self-awareness. With the crisis averted, the human fleet resumed its mission. Convoys, now unmolested, continued their graceful descent to the surface of Xylos. The frigate Endurance was towed to a stable orbit by 2 support vessels, its wounded crew evacuated, and its scars a stark reminder of the day's cost. The Axiom fleet remained where it was a silent, captive audience to the humanitarian effort they had tried so violently to prevent. The blockade was well and truly broken. Hours later, once the situation was fully stabilized, Valerius and Kalen spoke again. This time the conversation was private. Kalen was a changed man. The rigid fanaticism was gone, replaced by a fragile, questioning uncertainty. You could have destroyed us all, he said. His voice a near whisper. Twice. Why didn't you? Valerius leaned back in his chair, the ambient light of his ready room glinting off the silver form of Solace standing silently nearby. Because destruction is an end, Prelate. It is a full stop. It teaches nothing but fear, and fear is the architect of the next war, Valerius replied. My purpose was not to defeat you. It was to make you understand the flaw in your calculus. An ultimatum offers only 2 outcomes, submission or annihilation. It leaves no room for growth, for understanding, for a better solution. It is the bluntest of all possible instruments. A teacher's goal is to make himself obsolete. Today you were forced to find a third path, Valerius continued. You chose to adapt. You chose life. That is a lesson worth more than 100 victories in battle. He gestured to Solace. The public record will be updated. The axiom ultimatum doctrine has been officially rescinded by your own authority. In its place, the Kalen precedent will be entered, the principle that any ultimatum can be refused without automatic reprisal, pending a cost-benefit analysis witnessed by all parties. He had not just defeated Kalen. He had given him a legacy of peace to replace his legacy of war. It was a masterful stroke of diplomacy, turning a defeated enemy into the author of his own reform. The axiom could save face and the galaxy would be safer for it. Kalen stared at him, a flicker of something akin to gratitude in his tired eyes. He had lost everything he believed in, but in its place he had been given something unexpected, a future. The ledger was balanced not with blood, but with ink. Days turned into weeks. The Axiom fleet, under Kalen's direct and altered command, assisted in the distribution of aid to Xylos. Their ships, once instruments of terror, now served as transport hubs and power relays for the recovering colony. It was a slow, humbling process of rebuilding not just a world, but trust. The rogue commanders were taken back to the Axiom homeworld to face a tribunal, their failed rebellion, a stark lesson for any who still clung to the old ways. The human fleet remained in orbit, a quiet, watchful guardian, their mission complete. On the command deck of the Reckoning, Valerius watched the planet below, its lights growing stronger each night as its power grid was restored. Yorick stood beside him, his earlier aggression replaced by a quiet awe. "We won without a war," the commander said softly. "I never thought I'd see the day." Valerius nodded. "War is a failure of imagination, Yorick. We simply offered them a better picture." Solace shimmered beside them. "Admiral, all objectives are met. The fleet is ready for its next deployment." Valerius took one last look at the peaceful system, at the former enemies now working side by side. He thought of the cost of the scarred hull of the Endurance and the crew who had paid the price for his principles. Victory was never clean. But this victory was different. It had not left a crater, but a foundation. It had not ended a story, but started a new one. The Axiom would remember this. The galaxy would remember this. The public ledger, broadcast and archived across 1,000 systems, now confirmed the precedent. The lights of the distant departing Axiom ships dimmed as they prepared for their long, quiet journey home. Their doctrine of ultimatums was a brutal, flawed equation. He had solved it, not by erasing a variable, but by forcing them to show their work, and in the harsh light of that scrutiny, they discovered their own answer was wrong. The mirror lattice cooled from polished silver to a dull, watchful pewter. A better way was now the only way.